Hello, this is Philemon Zachariou sharing with you some of my book's highlights. The book consists of two main parts, authentic Greek sounds and the Erasmian influence. Part 1 shows that the phonemic sounds of mainstream modern Greek are not modern or new, but historical, and the modern Greek way of reading and pronouncing consonants, vowels, and vowel digraphs was established by or initiated within the classical Greek period. Part 2 shows that the effects of Erasmian on the Hellenic language and learning go far beyond the issue of pronunciation alone. Some special names will help. Hellenic means Greek. Neohellenic is the official name for today's modern Greek. Attic Greek, the Hellenic of classical Athens. Hellenistic, the period 300 BC to AD 300. Kini, not koine or kune. Kini, common tongue. Biblical Greek refers to the kini of the Septuagint and of the New Testament. Chapter 1 is on the development of kini. Kini did not come directly from the artistic literary Attic used in the masterpieces of Sophocles, Plato, Aristotle, and others, but from the Demotic Attic, the vernacular spoken in Athens at that time, but whose literary level was deeply influenced by the artistic literary Attic. Because we rely primarily on the written record to determine the pronunciation of kini, it is important to understand the historicity of the Greek alphabet. So let's go back to the time the Greek alphabet was ratified. After the Persian Wars, the Athenians, having long realized that their old Attic writing system was deficient, began to borrow the Ionic alphabet, a 24-letter alphabet their kinsmen, the Ionians, had perfected. So 403 BC is a very important year. In 403 BC, Athens, under Archon Euclides, officially adopted the Ionic alphabet, which also became known as the post-Euclidean grammar. Here it is, 24 capital letters. It is thus from 403 BC onward that we can more confidently rely on the written evidence to track the sounds not only of kini but also of Attic Greek. Some of the changes in the Attic alphabet involved vowels and vowel digraphs. Listed on the left side of this page are post-Euclidean vowels and vowel digraphs, and on the right side, the pre-Euclidean vowels and vowel digraph. Look at line 1. The 4 single letters and digraphs were all represented in the 5th century BC by a single letter, e. Likewise, on line 2, the 3 symbols or letters were represented in the 5th century BC by one symbol, o. So how would an Athenian in the 5th century BC know the difference between what would have been in line 1 epsilon and the third symbol eta, or line 2, the first one o, or the third one u? The answer is context. These changes allowed for the distinction of grammatical form. Here we have a linguistic phenomenon. The 24-letter post-Euclidean alphabet and spelling are shared by classical Attic, Kini, and Neohellenic. They have the same alphabet and spelling rules. From the 9th century on, we also have the lowercase letters, but again the alphabet is one and the same. Chapter 2 is on the phonology of Kini and its similarities to Neohellenic. Listed below, you will see areas of Greek phonology that are disputed chiefly by Erasmians. This video briefly touches on a few of these areas. Here we have 7 single consonants that are disputed, 4 single vowels, 5 so-called genuine diphthongs, or vowel digraphs, 3 spurious diphthongs, 3 fricativized diphthongs, the so-called aspirate or rough breath mark, vowel quantity, this is about long and short vowels in verse, not in speech. Let us begin with Neohellenic. There is a false assumption about modern Greek. Many scholars hold that the phenomenon of iotacism, whereby certain Greek sounds merged into the iota E sound, is true of modern Greek but not of Attic Greek. For there was no reason for the Athenians, a people of the subtlest intellect, to have assigned the same phonetic value to such a variety of E-sound symbols. Iotacism includes the leveling of alpha, iota, and epsilon, and omega and omicron. As it will be shown, this variety of spellings for the same sound is not a modern invention, but the result of a centuries-old linguistic progression that reached classical Athens. Iotacism can cause spelling errors. For the historical linguist, a blessing in disguise. The next few slides show what can be revealed about pronunciation when spelling errors result from confusing letters that stand for the same sound. Meanwhile, bear in mind that from 403 BC down to Neohellenic, as will be shown, Greek spelling rules are virtually the same. To begin with, let us look at some spelling errors in Neohellenic. On the left side of this page, you see a list of Neohellenic words and their meaning, and on the right side, you see the same words misspelled. Look now at the first 2 words. Phili, phili. They sound alike. That means that iota, ypsilon, and eta today are read the same way. E. If you saw these words misspelled in a text, you would have to figure out the meaning from the context, like ancient Greeks did. But what is an error in spelling? What defines error? Simple, the violation of a spelling rule, that is, grammar. A misspelling is a grammatical error. One A ends in a iota because grammatically it is a neuter gender noun, and one B ends in an eta because grammatically it is a feminine gender noun. A person not educated enough to know these rules is likely to misspell these words. Look now at 3A, B, C, and D. All 4 of these words sound alike. Meli. 3A is a neuter gender noun and it ends in a iota. 3B is a verb, third person singular ending in epsilon iota, so is 3C but a different verb. And 3D, the plural of a neuter gender noun ending in os. Notably, the above sample words are spelled and understood the same way in Neohellenic, in Kini, and in Attic. In other words, an orthographical error in these words today would have likewise been considered an error in Kini and in Attic, the cause for the error being one and the same, the confusion of different letters that stand for the same sound. Let us now go back in time to Byzantine times. Here we have a list of spelling errors in Byzantine New Testament manuscripts. Look at the nature of the interchange. Number 1, for instance, iota is used for epsilon iota because the 2 sound alike. E. Number 2, epsilon iota is used for eta because the 2 sound alike. E. Number 3 and number 4 and number 5. Look at number 5. Iota is used for omicron iota because they sound alike. Go to number 7. Epsilon is used for iota. 8. Alpha iota for epsilon. 9. Eta for epsilon, and so on. All these types of error are the same as in Neohellenic. Let us go further back in time to New Testament and pre-New Testament times. The list of errors that you see here is no different from what we have already seen in Byzantine manuscripts and in Neohellenic. Iota is used for epsilon iota is used for iota. Epsilon is used for omicron iota, and so on. Down to the bottom, epsilon is used for iota. Once more, let's go further back in time to classical and pre-classical Attic. Interchange of E-sound letters in the pre-classical and classical period. This table reflects the same type of errors that we saw earlier in pre-New Testament times, Byzantine times, and Neohellenic. It may be argued that inscriptions tell us more about orthography than pronunciation. However, it must be underscored that the unbroken tradition of faulty reading emerging at the beginning of the inscriptional period about 600 BC and continuing through the classical Hellenistic, Byzantine, and Neo-Hellenic periods, and judged throughout by the same standard, the same historical writing and spelling system, is the best proof of the diachronic presence of the historical sounds and pronunciation of Greek. For the same interchange found in the Hellenistic papyri and Byzantine manuscripts are traced to classical times, practically all of which are mirrored in Neo-Hellenic. Here we have Plato's testimony regarding iota e, epsilon iota e, eta e. He is saying that in his time, people would spell a word 3 different ways. Now with the iota, now with an epsilon iota, and now with an eta. It does not mean that the word was pronounced 3 different ways. It simply means that those 3 symbols have the same sound. What we see in Plato's time is what we see presently in Neo-Hellenic. So actually, Plato's testimony confirms the pronunciation issue. Plato lived during the transition from the Old Attic alphabet to the Ionic alphabet. So he was very familiar with the confusion that transition created. Ioticism, therefore, is not a modern development, but is traceable all the way to Plato's day. Here we have an example of a misspelling in a decree inscribed in 399 BC, shortly after the introduction of the new Attic alphabet. The error here is the spelling of the letter omega in place of an omicron. What does that tell you? As an example, that omega and omicron sounded alike. There's no difference in length or quality between the 2 letters, omega and omicron. The spelling mistakes etched in stone from the end of the 5th century BC provide the strongest proof of the phonemic pronunciation of Greek in the classical period. The same mistakes are repeated in the Hellenistic papyri and throughout the Byzantine period down to the present. This diachrony of recurring spelling errors is evidence that the historical sounds of Greek are preserved in Neo-Hellenic. Spelling error versus alternative spelling. Often what appears to be a misspelling may in fact be an alternative spelling. In the next few slides we will see samples of that and the reason behind it. Alternative spelling is often subject to the phenomenon of Greek dimorphia, a 2-level form of Greek traceable to classical Attic. One level is the informal level and the other one the formal level. The dimorphic nature of Greek is reflected in the formal use of plosives b, d, g, versus the informal use of fricatives f, th, h, in the same word. By the way, the book challenges Sidney Allen's position that the modern Greek fricatives f, th, h were not classical Attic sounds, but evolved from the Attic aspirated plosives b, t, g. Anyway, here we have some examples of formal versus informal use of these fricatives and stops. Formal epta versus informal efta. Octo, ochto. Trepo, threpo. This dimorphic phenomenon is traceable from Neo-Hellenic to classical Attic. Here's one example. Here we have 2 Athenian voting ostraca from 482 BC. On the left, you see the name Themistoklis, spelled with a taf, t. And on the right, the same name, Themistoklis, spelled with a theta. Something can be said about the tenacity of the historical Greek sounds, especially these 6 fricative sounds. There is no hard evidence that the fricative phonemes phi, theta, he, vita, delta, gamma in Neohellenic were the plosive phonemes, as you see them here, in Aristotle's day. No one can explain, for that matter, when, where, or how 6 presumed Attic plosives were molded in sync into fricatives by New Testament times or thereabout throughout the immense empire. Yet, for a disproportionately much longer period, 2 millennia, each has remained fricative. The very longevity of these fricatives to date evinces the tenacious intrinsic properties with which they transitioned from classical Attic to Kini. Let us now look at one of the most disputed sounds, the so-called aspirate or rough breath mark. In his famed Vox Graeca, Sidney Allen holds that the so-called aspirate in classical Attic was a phonemic consonant sound, but that its consonantal value dropped out of general use after the introduction of the Ionic alphabet in 403 BC. Contrary to Allen's claim, the aspirate in classical Attic prior to 403 BC was mute. It was a relic of the past. This is supported by many Attic inscriptions, 2 of which are shown below. This classical Attic decree shows that the word ierea, priestess, in the dative singular, appears with the aspirate and then again without the aspirate. Its presence or absence makes no difference in pronunciation. Here we have another decree from the 5th century BC. Highlighted in green are words that are aspirated, and in red, words that are not aspirated but should have been aspirated. Also, the upper 3 green arrows point to the same aspirated word. The bottom green arrow points to exactly the same word, which is not aspirated this time. This erratic use or non-use of the aspirate in the classical period speaks of the fact that the presence or absence of the aspirate made no difference in pronunciation. This is a summary of Chapter 2. The numbers in red show areas that were a little bit touched on in this video. But numbers 1 through 16 point out the many phonological areas that Kini and Neohellenic share. Chapter 3, the historical Greek pronunciation. History tells us that Plato was Aristotle's teacher. Aristotle was Alexander's teacher. Therefore, Alexander spoke classical Attic. Plato's or Aristotle's phonemic sounds were also Alexander's. These historical sounds, at the threshold of the Hellenistic period, are the progenitors of mainstream Greek sounds that may collectively be referred to as the historical Greek pronunciation. Alexander and Aristotle died within 1 year of each other. Look now at the commencement of the Septuagint translation in Kini, 285 BC. Notice that between, say, Aristotle's death in 322 BC and the commencement of the Septuagint translation is barely 40 years. Keep that in mind. Question 1. Given the fact that in 285 BC, the 72 Septuagint translators used the post-Euclidean writing and spelling system, the same as that used by Aristotle and Alexander to translate Hebrew scriptures into Kini. How different were their Kini phonemic sounds from those of Aristotle or Alexander 40 years earlier? We are technically talking about classical Attic versus Kini. Question number 2. Given the fact that the New Testament authors who quoted passages from the Septuagint wrote as well in the same Kini and applied the same post-Euclidean writing and spelling system, What hard evidence is there, if any, that those New Testament authors read and pronounced the quoted Septuagint passages in a phonemically different Kini manner from that of the 72 translators back in 285 BC? One more mention of the tenacity of the historical Greek pronunciation. Let's look at 3 language groups from among the Indo-European family of languages, namely Latin, Germanic, and Hellenic. What happened to Latin? It turned into French, Italian, Portuguese, and so on. Germanic turned into Danish, Dutch, English, and so on. Hellenic turned into Hellenic, Neohellenic. In direct contrast to the fate of other Indo-European dialects, which grew farther and farther apart, the Hellenic dialects, Attic, Ionic, Doric, Aeolic, these are the main ones, under the predominance of Attic, have survived merged into one language whose continuity over the centuries down to Neo-Hellenic has curbed change to glacial slowness. Now we come to chapter 4, which is on the origins and nature of the Erasmian pronunciation. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, many Byzantine scholars fled to Europe, bringing with them invaluable knowledge and treasured texts of Greek learning. In the early 1520s, 3 prominent scholars, one from Spain, one from France, and one from Italy, convinced Desiderius Erasmus, a learned and influential Dutch scholar, that the Byzantines mispronounced ancient Greek vowels and diphthongs, sacrificed vowel length to accent, used no aspiration, and failed to transliterate and pronounce certain Greek letters after their Latin counterparts. In 1528, Erasmus published a satire in Latin about Greek pronunciation in the form of a dialogue between a lion and a bear. As a result, this satire introduced throughout Europe a pronunciation system that is now commonly known as Erasmian. Erasmian inconsistencies. This table shows information gleaned from the pronunciation keys of 14 Erasmian authors. 14 letters pronounced 36 different ways. For example, alpha is pronounced by one author A as in hat, by another author A as in hate, by another author A as in father, and by another author A as in cup, and so on. What some scholars say about the various Erasmian pronunciations of Kini. Several different systems of pronouncing the vowels and diphthongs are in use. The instructor's pronunciation should be imitated, no matter what that pronunciation might be. Hardly any of these pronunciations are even nearly right. I use an Erasmian system, freely acknowledging that it is not what Jesus and Paul sounded like when they spoke Greek. Chapter 5 deals with a couple of Erasmian misconceptions about Neohellenic. A typically Erasmian misconception about Neohellenic is very well described by an Erasmian scholar. He says, the fact that certain diphthongs became monophthongs in the history of Greek creates a problem, that of the pronunciation of New Testament Greek. The pronunciation now used in modern Greece differs greatly from this and is much more difficult for English-speaking students. So the misconception is named difficulty. Difficulty for English-speaking students. In connection with the difficulty English-speaking students face in reading New Testament Greek the Neo-Hellenic way, here this chart shows that there are 20 Greek phonemes and 33 spelling variations that represent those phonemes. In other words, once the student becomes familiar with the sound each letter represents, he or she will be able to read Greek without any second guessing. Reading reading and pronouncing Greek is entirely consistent. This table reflects the same type of information as the previous table. It is simply given here for the sake of comparison. Think in terms of difficulty faced by a learner of English at the beginning level. That student has to learn 39 phonemic sounds and spell them 248 different ways. Now the list is not exhaustive. Look at the first two lines up on top. They show 30 different ways of spelling the E sound in English. Other sounds are spelled a dozen or more different ways. For the English-speaking seminarian, this is really second nature. But a learner of English, unlike a learner of Greek, has to memorize the pronunciation of virtually every single English word. What is the conclusion of all this? English-speaking students ought to feel superbly equipped to handle the less complex traditional Greek reading, writing, and pronouncing system. But that's not the point. The point is the concern of difficulty in language learning is irrelevant. That is no basis for the instructor to apply anachronistic methods to facilitate the student, or more precisely, the instructor himself. Then we come to Chapter 6, Erasmian Latitudes. Let's start by looking at an oddity here, a pronunciation oddity. Erasmian scholars presume that in Hellenistic times, Greek underwent phonemic changes as a result of Alexander's spread of εκείνοι, with classical Greek and εκείνοι sounds becoming very different. Oddly enough, though, these same scholars pronounce classical Attic and εκείνοι alike. One then would hardly be amiss in assuming that Erasmian scholars consider Aristotle's pronunciation of classical Greek a more appropriate pronunciation system for New Testament Greek than Paul's own pronunciation of εκείνοι. But let us now get a bird's eye view of the transformation of the Greek vocalic system over the past 3,500 years and see how Erasmian fits as a pronunciation system for classical Greek. From Mycenaean to Neohellenic, scholars know today that the linear B script from 1500 to 1200 BC indicates that Mycenaean Greek had 5 vowels: E, E, A, O, U. Here they are. Compare them with the Neohellenic vowels. They are identical. Bear this in mind. Keeping in mind the 5 Mycenaean and Neohellenic vowels, let us see what a modern Erasmian scholar says about the pronunciation of classical Greek. He says, the pronunciation commonly used in American colleges and seminaries is an attempt to approximate that used by an Athenian during the classical period in Greece, 5th and 4th centuries BC. This scholar's rendition of the classical Greek vocalic system is 10 long and short vowels and 8 diphthongs. Now, pondering over this phantasmagoric view of the Greek vocalic system, one may wonder if, by 500 BC, the 5 Mycenaean Greek vowels evolved to such magnitude, how did their evolutionary process reverse itself, and rather than continue to generate further changes, as did all the Romance and Germanic dialects, it caused the original 5 Mycenaean vowels by New Testament times to reappear in their original state, and then for 20 more whole centuries it caused no further changes? The answer is as obvious as it is logical. From Mycenaean times to the present, Greek has always had a 5-vowel phonemic system. Looking at this line of letters on this page, it means that the 5 Mycenaean vowels by classical times increased 360%. And then from classical Greek to Hellenistic or Neohellenic times, there was a complete reversal of that increase. In other words, we started with 5 vowels in Mycenaean, those vowels exploded by classical times and they became 18 vocalic sounds. Then the sound system imploded and it went back to its original state. Let's now look at Sidney Allen's Vox Graeca. Sidney Allen says that classical Greek had 12 single vowel phonemes, 7 long vowels and 5 short vowels. At the same time, it had 8 phonemic diphthongs. This 20-phoneme Attic Greek vocalic system reflects a 400% increase of the 5-phoneme Mycenaean vocalic system. The book critiques Allen's position on the Attic vowels in different sections in the book, eta and epsilon iota, eta and iota, and so on, and other Attic sounds, the aspirate and then those other sounds. And the book shows that Allen's pronunciation of classical Greek is indeed untenable. Chapter 7 talks about the Erasmian harm and the remedy. The Erasmian harm is the dichotomy of Greek. Early in the 1500s, the Erasmian axe of dichotomy was brought down into the heart of the Greek language and scholarship, thereby severing earlier Greek, classical and Hellenistic, from the later Greek, Byzantine, and Neohellenic. What is now at stake as a result is the meaning of the Greek texts, which needs to receive light exegetically not from the earlier Greek only, but also from the later history of the language. For a unity exists between the New Testament and Neohellenic that should not be ignored or left unexplored. A number of terms strongly associated with Christianity occur for the first time in the New Testament and continue in modern Greek usage with the same meanings. Furthermore, the nature of this connection is such that New Testament contains many features that have more affinity with modern Greek than classical Greek. Neohellenic helps in the solution of text-critical issues, many of which are of an acoustic nature and are thus related to pronunciation, whereas the Erasmian system may lead to unforeseen negative consequences, particularly in the field of textual criticism. The last chapter is on pronunciation tips. Chapter 8 covers helpful points regarding the historical Greek pronunciation and further compares Greek and English phonologies. The appendixes analyze 10 classical Attic inscriptions in support of a number of pronunciation points discussed in the book. Here are our conclusions. No pronunciation system comes closer to the pronunciation of classical Attic than that of εκείνοι. No pronunciation system comes closer to the pronunciation of the εκείνοι of New Testament times and the Christian era than that of Neohellenic. Erasmian is disadvantageous to the study of the Greek language and literature. Thank you for viewing.